The heavy glass door of the bistro usually announces a guest, but when Kang Min-Jae enters, it announces a vacuum. The jazz seems to flatline, and the clinking of silverware dies in the throats of the patrons. He is a pillar of cold, tailored charcoal against the warm soul food air, his slicked-back hair shimmering with raindrops like tiny diamonds. He doesn't look at the menu. He doesn't look at the manager. His intense, narrowed eyes go straight to the corner, to table 4. It's empty. He scans the floor, searching for the soft features and radiant dark skin of the only woman who makes the blood in his veins feel like something other than ice. A new waitress, young and trembling, scurries toward him with a menu. "Good evening, sir, if you'd like to follow me." Min-Jae doesn't let her finish. He doesn't even look at her. His jaw locks so tight the muscle leaps in his cheek, and his hand clamps over the back of the chair at table 4 until the wood groans. The ritual is broken. Without Amara, this room is just a hollow box of noise and grease. Without a word, he spins on his heel, his Italian leather boots striking the floor like a death sentence. The bell chimes a frantic warning as he slams back out into the storm, leaving a wake of terrified silence behind him. 24 hours later, the rain is still falling, but the silence is gone. Min-Jae sits in the back of his black sedan, the engine a low, predatory growl. He is watching the sidewalk. There she is, Amara, looking as beautiful as a sunrise in the middle of a graveyard. But she isn't alone. She is tucked under a sturdy umbrella, her laughter muffled by the glass of his window. The man beside her, Ethan Brooks, has a hand resting on her arm with an easy, casual grace that Min-Jae has never known. He looks safe. He looks like the light. As the couple navigates a puddle, Ethan pulls her closer, their shoulders brushing. Inside the car, Min-Jae's knuckles turn bone-white against the steering wheel. A possessive fire, cold and lethal, ignites in his chest. He realizes then that while he was protecting her from the shadows, he let a wolf in sheep's clothing walk her into the rain. The observation is over. The war for her soul has just begun. But before we go deeper into this story, if you enjoy intense stories like this, make sure you like and subscribe. The jazz in the bistro was a low, honeyed thrum, but it couldn't mask the sudden, pressurized silence that descended the moment Kang Min-Jae returned. He moved like a shadow given form, his presence reclaiming table 4 with a cold, magnetic authority that made the other patrons lower their voices without knowing why. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't need to. His eyes, dark and predatory, were fixed solely on the kitchen doors until Amara emerged. When she saw him, her heart performed a jagged stutter against her ribs. For months, she had lived for this silent exchange, the way his intense gaze seemed to strip away the noise of the restaurant until it was only the two of them. She approached him, her movements fluid despite the heat rising in her cheeks. As she set his Hibiki 21 on the wood, the amber liquid catching the neon glow of the open sign, their fingers brushed. It was a fleeting, electric contact, a spark of recognition that felt like a secret language they had been practicing for half a year. "You came back," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the clink of ice. Min-Jae didn't answer immediately. He reached out, his hand lingering near hers on the table, his knuckles pale against the dark wood. For a heartbeat, the ritual felt like it was evolving into something more. The ruthless lines of his face softened, and the possessive fire in his eyes turned into a smoldering, protective heat. It was a glimmer of hope, a silent promise that he saw the woman behind the apron, and she saw the man behind the monster. "I don't go where you aren't, Amara," he replied, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that settled deep in her chest. The air between them was thick, charged with an unspoken gravity that pulled them closer across the table. Amara felt herself leaning into his orbit, her breath hitching as his eyes dropped to her lips. The world was narrowing down to this single, shadowed corner, a sanctuary built on 6 months of longing. Then the bell above the door chimed, a bright, intrusive sound that shattered the spell. "Amara, sorry I'm late, the rain is coming down in sheets out there." Ethan Brooks stepped into the bistro, shaking a wet, yellow umbrella that looked like a neon wound against the restaurant's moody interior. He was a burst of uncomplicated sunlight, his friendly face and casual denim jacket a jarring contrast to the lethal elegance of the man at table 4. Ethan walked toward her with an easy, proprietary confidence, his hand reaching out to familiarly touch her shoulder as he stepped between her and Min-Jae. "Ready to head out? I've got the car double parked," Ethan said, flashing a warm, dependable smile that usually made Amara feel safe. But today, the safety felt like a cage. Amara felt the atmosphere at the table turn from a smoldering coal to a roaring furnace. She didn't have to look at Min-Jae to know his jaw had locked into a hard, uncompromising line. The safe man had arrived, blissfully unaware that he was standing in the path of a predator, and the cold, possessive shadow falling over the table told Amara that the silent connection she cherished had just become a declaration of war. The interior of the black sedan was a vault of silent, pressurized rage. Rain hammered against the reinforced roof, a relentless metallic drumming that mirrored the frantic rhythm of Kang Min-Jae's heart. He sat in the backseat, his shadow swallowed by the deep leather, his eyes fixed on the two figures reflected in the side mirror. Outside, the world was a blur of neon-stained asphalt and gray mist, but Amara and Ethan were a sharp, agonizing focus. They moved together under the wide canopy of a yellow umbrella, a small, private island of warmth in the middle of a cold city. Min-Jae watched as Ethan's hand settled on the small of Amara's back, guiding her around a deep puddle with a casual, easy intimacy that felt like a serrated blade across Min-Jae's skin. He had spent 6 months watching her from the corner table, memorizing the way her natural dark skin glowed under the bistro's dim lights, and the soft, musical way she spoke his name. He had convinced himself that his silent protection was enough, that being the shadow in her periphery was his burden to bear. But seeing her now, laughing at something Ethan whispered, her head tilted back in a way that exposed the delicate line of her throat, the lie of his restraint shattered. Jealousy wasn't a slow burn for a man like Min-Jae. It was a flash fire. "Should we move, boss?" the driver asked, his voice low and hesitant, sensing the lethal tension radiating from the back. "No," Min-Jae rasped, his voice a jagged edge. "Wait." He watched as they reached the stoop of her apartment building. The yellow umbrella tilted back, revealing their faces. Ethan was looking at her with the kind of uncomplicated, sunny devotion that a man with clean hands could afford. He looked safe. He looked like a future that didn't involve blood-stained ledgers or midnight burials. When Ethan reached out to tuck a damp, curly strand of hair behind Amara's ear, Min-Jae's knuckles turned bone-white as he gripped the armrest. The leather groaned under his strength. He wanted to step out of the car, to let the rain wash away the god of industry persona, and show Ethan exactly what happens when a civilian touches something that belongs to the night. He wanted to roar at the sky, to demand she look at him instead of this fraud who walked in the light. But he stayed in the dark. He watched as Amara gave Ethan a gentle, lingering smile before disappearing inside. The umbrella closed, and Ethan walked away with the stride of a man who believed he was a hero. Min-Jae leaned back into the shadows, his chest heaving. The possessive fire hadn't been extinguished by the rain. It had been fed. Ethan Brooks was a man of light, but Min-Jae knew that every light cast a shadow. He pulled out his phone, the glow illuminating the hard, ruthless lines of his face and the subtle ink on his neck. "Find out everything," he commanded into the receiver, his eyes still fixed on the door where Amara had vanished. "Every debt, every lie, every person Ethan Brooks has ever stepped on. I want his life dismantled by morning." The car pulled away from the curb, a black ghost merging into the storm, leaving only the cold certainty that the sanctuary Ethan offered was about to be burned to the ground. The command center of the Kang estate was a tomb of glass and cold machinery, tucked away from the rain that continued to lash against the exterior of the compound. Min-Jae stood before a wall of monitors, his reflection ghost-like against the blue light of scrolling data. He hadn't changed out of his wet suit. The damp fabric clung to his broad shoulders, a cold reminder of the shared umbrella he had just witnessed. His jaw remained set in that same punishing line, the muscle leaping every time he replayed the image of Ethan Brooks touching Amara's hair. "Everything," Min-Jae murmured, his voice cutting through the hum of cooling fans like a serrated blade. "I want his childhood, his bank records, the names of the people he's lied to, and the ones he stepped on to keep that friendly face of his so clean." Behind him, his head of intelligence, a man who had dismantled rival syndicates with a few keystrokes, hesitated. "Sir, Brooks has a clean profile. Architectural firm, no priors, a record of charitable." "No one is that clean," Min-Yi snapped, spinning around. His dark, intense eyes were narrowed, focused with a lethal precision that made the air in the room feel thin. "Men who walk in the sunlight always carry the darkest shadows. They just hide them better. Dig until the dirt gets under your fingernails. I want to know why a man with a safe future is suddenly spending his nights at a Seoul-style bistro in the middle of a war zone. People like him don't move toward the dark unless they're running from something." He turned back to the monitors, his hand tracing the edge of his jaw, his thumb brushing the subtle ink of the tattoo beneath his collar. To the world, Min-Yi was the monster, the man of blood and bone who commanded silence without speaking. But Ethan Brooks was a different kind of threat, a deceptive light that promised Amara a sanctuary that didn't exist. As the hours bled into the early morning, the dark archive began to open. Encrypted files were peeled back like layers of dead skin. Min-Yi watched as the first cracks appeared. A failed offshore investment, a series of suspicious wire transfers, a history of using clients' funds to cover personal debts. It wasn't just a dirty past. It was a systematic fraud, a selfish betrayal of trust hidden behind casual denim jackets and warm smiles. Min-Yi felt a grim, possessive satisfaction settle in his chest. The jealousy was still there, a racing pulse in his throat, but it was now armored with purpose. Ethan Brooks wasn't her savior. He was a wolf using her light to hide his own rot. "Print it all," Min-Yi commanded, his eyes fixed on a photo of Ethan looking dependably into the camera. "Every lie, every fraudulent scent. I'm going to show her exactly what kind of safety he's offering. And then I'm going to watch him burn in the light he thinks he owns." He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out toward the city where Amara was sleeping, unaware that the two worlds she occupied were about to collide with the force of a high-speed wreck. The war of truth had begun, and Min-Yi was ready to be the one to pull the trigger. The digital dossier on the monitor was an autopsy of a life built on a lie. Min-Yi stood motionless, the blue luminescence of the screen carving deep, sharp shadows into his high cheekbones. He had spent his entire life in the mud of the underworld, where a man's sins were etched into his skin and spoken in the language of scars. But this, the data streaming before him, was a different kind of filth. It was the sterile, cowardly rot of a man who stole while wearing a smile. The dark archive was more than just a list of debts. It was a map of Ethan Brooks' systematic predation. There were the offshore accounts used to siphon retirement funds from elderly clients, the forged signatures on architectural safety inspections, and a trail of charitable donations that were nothing more than a laundry cycle for embezzled cash. Ethan wasn't just a rival for Amara's heart. He was a parasite masquerading as a savior. Min-Yi's intense, narrowed eyes tracked a specific wire transfer. Ethan had been using a portion of his fraudulent gains to pay off the very safe apartment he was promising Amara. The irony tasted like copper in Min-Yi's mouth. The man who looked like he belonged in the sunlight was actually a wolf in sheep's clothing, building a nest for Amara out of stolen feathers. "He's using her," Min-Yi whispered, his voice a low, lethal vibration that seemed to make the glass walls of the command center tremble. "He's using her light to hide his own shadow." A possessive rage, cold and calculated, settled over him. For months, Min-Yi had felt like the monster at the edge of the woods, a man too stained by his mafia responsibilities to ever offer Amara the peace she deserved. He had envied Ethan's clean face and the easy way he walked her home in the rain. But now the mirror had flipped. Ethan's goodness was a costume, a fragile mask that Min-Yi was more than ready to shatter. He reached out, his thumb brushing the frozen image of Ethan's face on the screen. It was a gesture of absolute, terrifying promise. Min-Yi realized that his own darkness, honest, heavy, and branded into his very flesh, was more honorable than the fake light Ethan projected. He wasn't just going to take Amara back, he was going to dismantle the lie she was living in. "Print the ledger," Min-Yi commanded, not looking away from the screen. "Every forged document, every stolen dollar. I want the weight of his sins to be so heavy that she can never look at him without seeing the ghost of the people he ruined. He turned away from the monitors, the subtle neck tattoo beneath his collar pulsing with a new, dark energy. The jealousy had evolved into a grim crusade. He would walk into the rain one more time, not as a silent observer at table 4, but as the one who would strip the safe man of his disguise and show Amara the true face of the man she thought was her sanctuary. The war was no longer about who loved her more. It was about who was honest enough to deserve her. The rain had transitioned from a violent downpour to a persistent, ghostly mist by the time Amara locked the bistro's front door. The streetlights cast long, shivering amber reflections on the pavement, and the silence of the city felt heavy, almost expectant. She pulled her coat tighter, her mind a chaotic map of the two men who had occupied her thoughts all day. But as she turned the corner toward the darkened route home, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew cold, pressurized by a presence that didn't belong in the quiet of a residential street. A sleek black sedan sat idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the fog like the eyes of a deep-sea predator. As she approached, the rear door swung open with a heavy, mechanical click. Kang Min-Jae stepped out. He didn't look like the silent observer from table 4 anymore. Standing in the middle of the sidewalk, his fitted black suit absorbing the dim light, he looked like a king who had walked off a battlefield. His dark, intense eyes locked onto hers, stripping away her defenses before she could even speak. "Mr. Kang," Amara's voice was a soft tremor in the night air. "What are you doing here?" He didn't move toward her, yet he seemed to occupy all the space around her. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The movement was slow, deliberate, and carried the weight of a death sentence. "You think you found a sanctuary, Amara," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that seemed to hum in the very bricks of the buildings behind them. "You think you found a man who can offer you the light." He stepped forward once, the rhythmic click of his boots echoing in the hollow street. He held the envelope out, his knuckles pale, his gaze never wavering from her face. "Ethan Brooks is a ghost built of lies," Min-Jae continued, the words sharp and lethal. "The safety he promises you is paid for with the lives of people he's ruined. Fraud, embezzlement, a trail of broken families, that is the foundation of the house he wants you to live in. He isn't walking you home because he loves you, he's using your innocence to hide his own rot." Amara felt the world tilt. She looked down at the envelope, her breath hitching. The safe man, the architect with the warm smile and the yellow umbrella, it felt impossible. But looking into Min-Jae's eyes, she saw no hesitation, only a dark, possessive honesty that was far more terrifying than a lie. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered, her fingers brushing his as she took the papers. Min-Jae's jaw tightened, the subtle neck tattoo beneath his collar pulsing with a sudden, dark energy. He leaned in, just close enough for her to smell the sandalwood and cold rain that always followed him. "Because I am a monster, Amara. I know exactly what one looks like when he's wearing a suit." He didn't wait for her to open the envelope. He didn't ask for her thanks or her belief. He simply turned and stepped back into the black sanctuary of his car. The door closed with a final, heavy thud, and the sedan pulled away from the curb, merging into the mist like a phantom. Amara stood alone under the flickering streetlight, the heavy ledger of Ethan's sins clutched to her chest, realizing that the man she thought was a villain had just handed her the only truth she had left. The yellow umbrella was a silk roof against the world, a vibrant burst of color in the gray drizzle of the city, but to Amara, it had begun to feel like a shroud. Beside her, Ethan was talking. His voice was steady, warm, and filled with the kind of easy, architectural plans that usually made her feel grounded. He spoke of blueprints and light-filled spaces, of a future that was supposed to be safe and solid. Yet, as they navigated the rain-slicked pavement, Amara felt as though she were walking on thin glass. Every time Ethan reached out to adjust the umbrella or guide her around a puddle, his touch felt different. It no longer felt like protection. It felt like a performance. In her mind, Min-Jae's gravelly warning replayed like a haunted record, his voice cutting through Ethan's pleasant chatter. "The safety he promises you is paid for with the lives of people he's ruined." She looked at Ethan's profile, the friendly face, the light stubble, the casual denim jacket. He looked exactly like the man she thought he was. But then she thought of the cream-colored envelope hidden in her dresser, the heavy ledger of wire transfers and forged signatures that painted a much darker picture. She searched for the cracks. Was the smile a second too late? Was the confidence in his stride actually arrogance? "Amara, you're awfully quiet tonight," Ethan said, his hand lingering on her arm with that same easy grace Min-Jae had loathed from the shadows. "Is everything okay at the bistro? You look like you're miles away." "I'm just tired, Ethan," she lied, the words tasting like ash. "The rain, it makes everything feel heavy." "I'll get you home soon," he promised, pulling her a fraction closer. "Just a few more blocks." She let him lead her, but she was mentally miles away, back at table 4. She thought of Min-Jae, the man who didn't hide his darkness, who wore his sins like a second skin. He had intercepted her in the mist not to offer a soft life, but to offer a hard truth. She found herself comparing the two, the man who claimed to be good while hiding a rot, and the man who claimed to be a monster while acting as her guardian. As they reached her stoop, the flickering streetlight caught the wet fabric of Ethan's jacket. For a split second, the light hit him at an angle that made his eyes look cold, almost predatory. It was a trick of the light, she told herself, but the seed of doubt had already sprouted. She realized she wasn't just uninterested in his conversation. She was repelled by the possibility that his entire safe existence was a fraud. "Good night, Amara," Ethan whispered, leaning in for a kiss that she instinctively avoided by turning her cheek. He didn't seem to notice the distance, simply smiling and turning back into the rain. Amara watched him go, the yellow umbrella disappearing into the fog. She realized then that Min-Jae hadn't just given her information. He had stripped away her ability to be blind. She stood on the stairs, cold and shivering, realizing that the monster had been more honest with her in 5 minutes than the hero had been in months. The walk was over, but the haunting had only just begun. The storm had returned with a vengeance, turning the narrow street into a canyon of thrashing rain and jagged lightning. Amara walked beside Ethan, her boots splashing through puddles that felt like deep, dark pits. Under the yellow umbrella, Ethan was still talking, his voice a drone of comfort that now sounded like static. Every step they took felt heavier, the weight of the envelope in her dresser pulling at her conscience, until the air itself seemed to thicken. They turned the corner toward her building, but the way was no longer clear. A wall of black steel sat idling in the center of the road, Min-Jae's sedan, its headlights cutting through the downpour like twin blades of white fire. Standing in front of the vehicle, draped in a long black overcoat that absorbed the wetness of the night, was Kang Min-Jae. He didn't have an umbrella. He stood in the deluge, his slicked-back hair plastered to his forehead, his intense, narrowed eyes locked onto the approaching couple. Ethan stopped abruptly, his hand tightening on Amara's arm. "Who is this guy? Amara, stay behind me." Min-Jae didn't look at Ethan. His focus was a singular, burning beam directed at Amara. He stepped forward, the rhythmic click of his boots lost to the roar of the rain, but his presence felt like a thunderclap. He stopped just feet away, the water cascading off his sharp jawline. "I gave you the truth, Amara," Min-Jae said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that carried easily over the storm. "I showed you the rot beneath the foundation. I showed you the stolen lives that paid for that umbrella you're standing under." Ethan stepped forward, his friendly face twisting into a mask of defensive bravado. "I don't know who you think you are, but you need to back off. Amara, let's go." "Why?" Min-Jae's voice rose, not in volume, but in a terrifying, pressurized intensity. He finally shifted his gaze to Ethan, a look of such pure, predatory disdain that Ethan visibly recoiled. "Why are you still standing with him? Is a comfortable lie really better than an honest monster?" Amara felt the heat of Min-Jae's possessive fire clashing with the cold rain. She looked at Ethan, who was now fumbling for words, his safe aura evaporating under the heat of Min-Jae's stare. Then she looked back at Min-Jae. He looked lethal, his dark neck tattoo glistening, yet there was a raw, jagged vulnerability in his eyes, a desperate demand for her to value the truth over the illusion of safety. "He's lying, Amara," Ethan hissed, though his voice lacked its usual architectural precision. "He's a criminal. He's trying to scare you." "I am a criminal," Min-Jae conceded, stepping into the small circle of light beneath the yellow umbrella, invading their space with a dominant, suffocating gravity. But I have never looked you in the eye and told you I was anything else. He's a thief who calls himself a builder. He's a wolf who wants to keep you as a pet in a house built of stolen glass. Min-Jae reached out, not to touch her, but to point at the space between them. I know you have feelings for me. I know you feel the pull of the dark just as much as I do. So tell me, Amara, why are you still hiding under his shade? The silence that followed was louder than the thunder. Amara stood in the center of the storm, the rain-slicked pavement reflecting the neon agony of the choice laid out before her. The war of truth had reached its front line, and the man in the black coat was refusing to let her retreat into the lie. The rain had reached a fever pitch, a deafening roar that swallowed the city, yet the space between the three of them felt unnervingly silent. Ethan's hand was still clamped on Amara's arm, his fingers digging into her skin with a desperate, shaky grip that no longer felt like protection. It felt like a claim. "Don't listen to him, Amara," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking against the wind. "He's a murderer. He's a monster who thrives in the dirt. He's trying to drag you down into his filth." Min-Jae didn't flinch. He didn't even blink as the rain washed over his sharp, high cheekbones. Instead, a cold, weary smile touched his lips, a look of profound, lethal clarity. "Filth," he repeated, the word a low vibration in his chest. "Yes, I am covered in it, but I wear mine on the outside, Brooks. I don't hide it under a denim jacket and a stolen smile." In one fluid, dominant motion, Min-Jae reached for the buttons of his black dress shirt. His movements were controlled, almost ritualistic, as he ignored the shivering cold. He cast the soaked fabric aside, revealing a physique built of lean, hard muscle and scarred ivory skin. But it was the ink that stole the air from Amara's lungs. A sprawling, intricate dragon spiraled across his chest and down his arms, its scales interlocking with the names of fallen men and the symbols of a 1,000-year-old burden. It wasn't art, it was a ledger. The ink was dark, aggressive, and heavy, flowing up his neck to the subtle tattoo Amara had always wondered about. "Look at me, Amara," Min-Jae commanded, stepping closer until the heat from his body defied the freezing rain. "Every mark on my skin is a debt I paid. I didn't kill for greed. I didn't steal to buy a penthouse or a fake reputation. I took the sins of my family, my people, and I branded them into my own flesh so they wouldn't have to carry them. My evil has a purpose. It feeds the hungry. It protects the weak who have no one else. It is a heavy, bloody responsibility, but it is honest." He turned his narrowed, intense gaze toward Ethan, his lip curling in disgust. "But him, he steals from the elderly to pay for his vanity. He forges signatures to hide his incompetence. His sins are small, selfish, and cowardly. He isn't a wolf, Amara. He's a parasite. He uses your light to mask the fact that he is hollow inside." Min-Jae reached out, his hand hovering inches from Amara's face, his palm upward, an invitation into the storm. The lightning flashed, illuminating the raw, jagged truth of his tattoos against the pale finish of his skin. "I am a man of the graveyard," he whispered, his voice thick with a possessive, aching sincerity. "I am a monster who will burn the world down to keep you warm. He is a good man who will let you freeze the moment the light exposes his lies. Now, look at both of us. Look at the ink and look at the suit. Tell me, Amara, who is the one truly lying to you?" Amara's gaze flickered from Ethan's pale, panicked face to the dark, tattooed truth of the man standing naked in the rain. The yellow umbrella tilted, slipping from Ethan's trembling hand, leaving them all exposed to the relentless, unforgiving sky. The war of truth had stripped them both bare, and for the first time, Amara saw the monster and the man for exactly what they were. The yellow umbrella lay forgotten on the wet pavement, a discarded shell of a life that no longer felt real. The rain was absolute now, a freezing deluge that blurred the world into streaks of gray and neon, but the two men standing before Amara remained in terrifyingly sharp focus. To her left stood Ethan, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps, his face a pale mask of desperate denial. To her right stood Min-Jae, his tattooed skin glistening like dark armor, his chest heaving with the weight of a truth he had finally laid bare. "Amara, please," Ethan choked out, his voice thin and brittle against the roar of the storm. He's a criminal, he's twisting things. We had a plan. The apartment, the future. Don't let a monster in a suit destroy us. Amara looked at him, and for the first time, the safety he offered felt like a suffocating shroud. She saw the tremor in his hands, not from the cold, but from the fear of being seen. He was a man of blueprints and polished glass, but the foundation was cracked with the rot of 1,000 small, selfish betrayals. He was the sun that only shone when the sky was clear. Then she turned her gaze to Min-Jae. He didn't plead. He stood with a lethal, stationary grace, the intricate dragon on his chest appearing to writhe under the rhythmic pulse of the lightning. The water tracked the deep lines of his scars and the heavy ink of his burdens. He was the storm itself, violent, honest, and devastating. He didn't promise her a bright room. He promised her a lethal sanctuary in the dark. He was the monster who had spent 6 months silently guarding her from a corner table, never asking for a thank you, only asking for her existence to continue. He knows you have feelings for him, Ethan hissed, a sudden, ugly bitterness sharpening his tone. He's using that pull you feel, that darkness. You're better than him, Amara. You don't belong in a graveyard. Min-Jae's intense, narrowed eyes never left hers. I am a graveyard, he whispered, the words vibrating through the soles of her boots. But I am a graveyard where you will never be alone. He is a palace built on sand. Choose, Amara. Choose the lie that keeps you warm or the truth that keeps you alive. The air between the three of them was thick with a possessive, agonizing tension. Amara felt the familiar, magnetic pull of Min-Jae's orbit, the language of the dark they had spoken in silence for half a year. But she also felt the phantom weight of the normal life Ethan represented, the easy smiles and the uncomplicated mornings she had always thought she wanted. She looked at the safe man, whose hands were stained with invisible greed. She looked at the monster, whose hands were stained with visible blood. The rain cascaded over her face, masking her tears. Her heart, once a steady rhythm, now beat with the chaotic energy of a woman who had finally run out of places to hide. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, breathing in the scent of sandalwood and cold rain, and then she opened them. With a slow, deliberate motion, Amara shifted her weight. She took a single, decisive step toward the center of the storm, her foot splashing into the dark water between them. Her gaze locked onto one pair of eyes, her lips parting as if to speak the name of the man she had chosen. Then the world vanished.